Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as Introduction to Indian Writing in English. We were discussing a seminal text, The Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai in the last class with the subtopic of its themes. Now, in this class, we are going to discuss the narrative techniques used in this text. This is going to be the last topic related to this text, the inheritance of loss. But before moving to the narrative techniques, you must know that what are you going to learn from this lecture. You would be able to justify the various writing narrative styles in the light of the selected text. So, what are the narrative styles of the writer and how they are playing a very important role in, let's say, moving of the novel? Friends, novel is not a still thing. Novel moves and the readers moves with that novel. So, the kind of, let's say, movement, the kind of action, the kind of, let's say, interest which created in the novel is due to the use of narrative techniques into it. In this lecture, we will look at the various narrative techniques used by Kiran Desai in this novel with the help of various quotations, various statements given by the characters, and how we are able to interpret as a reader all those, let's say, quotations and situations, etc. So let us begin this lecture. This book abounds in rich sensual description. These can be sublimely beautiful, and such as in the images of the flourishing of nature at the local convent in spring. So friends, when we see this lecture, we find that this lecture has lot of sensual description, outer nature description, or let's say beauty and sublimity, which is, let's say, observed by the writer in the surroundings. Let us try to understand all these things with the help of this quotation from the text. And I quote, "Huge, spread open Easter lilies were stick with spilling antlers. Insects chased each other madly through the sky. Zip, zip, and amorous butterflies, cucumber green, tumbled past the jeep windows into the deep marine valley." Friends, I told you earlier that the setting of this text is Kalimpong, near Darjeeling. Now you know that Darjeeling is a hilly area, and Kalimpong must be not very crowded place, not very developed place, near to nature, near to greenery, near to, let's say, peace in the surroundings. And that kind of nature, that kind of peace is visible into this statement, with the beautiful description of the colors which are spreaded around the nature, the various insects, the various breeds of insects which are visible at that place. They can also be horrific, such as in the description of the protest march. But friends, there are some contrasting images also. There are few things which had broken the peace of this place. There are few things which had broken, let's say, the isolation of this place. And what is that? The protest march which happened in the story. Let us, in this definition, let us try to see the scene, how the writer has narrated the condition of the protest march. One Jawan was knifed to death. The arms of another were chopped off. A third was stabbed, and the heads of the policemen came up on a stake before the station across from the bunch under the plume tree, where the town's people had rested themselves in more peaceful times, and the cook sometimes read his letters. A beheaded body ran briefly down the street, blood fountaining from the neck. So friends, this is the kind of let's say image which suggests the breaking of peace, the breaking of natural environment which is visible at this place Kalimpong. There was one Jawan who was knifed to death. Then there were, let's say, another Jawan who was chopped off by the revolutionists, by the people who were supporting the movement. They killed many policemen, they stabbed many policemen, and with all these examples, the writer is also trying to talk about the bench under the plume tree where the town people had rested themselves in more peaceful times, and the cook sometimes read his letters. There are many peaceful places in this place, friends. There is a plume tree under which there is a bench. On the other hand, the people used to relax on this bench. The cook used to read the letters of his son at this bench. But what happened during this movement? There was a bee-headed body fall down near this bench, and the blood was coming out from the neck of that body. So we can understand, friends, that this movement GNLF has broken the peace, the positivity of this place. The inheritance of loss takes on huge subjects such as morality and justice, globalization, racial, social and economic inequality, fundamentalism and alienation. It takes its readers on the seesaw of negative emotions. Friends, when we read this text, this inheritance of loss, we find that it is versatile in its approach. It has covered various themes, just like it talks about morality and justice. What is moral in a situation? What is justifiable in a situation? The readers will be confused that if a character is behaving in this manner, is the character a protagonist? Is the character an antagonist? Or the character is victim of the circumstances? There are scenes related to globalization, how the people are living in the globalized world. People are migrating from one place to another place. We have examples of racial discrimination or social and economic inequality which is visible in the case of Gyan and Sai. Gyan belonged to a very poor Nepali family, and thus he felt inferior when he was in the company of Sai. There is fundamentalism when we talk about the case of GNLF people, the people who are supporting the Bodo movement, because they were fundamentals. They had some ideologies. They stick to those ideologies. They were against the functioning of the government. They wanted to change the government. They wanted to create a revolution in Kalimpong, and which is why this novel is also covering the fundamentalist aspect. There is alienation also. The place was peaceful, but there is disturbance in the mind of the judge. The judge stayed there for a long, but is always alienated. He used to meet many people every day. He used to travel across many parts of India during his job, but even then he had no friends. He is alienated. He is alone in his own life. So he is surrounded by people, but cut off from all of them emotionally. There is pathos, which often goes hand in hand with revulsion. For example, in the description of the judge's adoration of his dog Mutt, the disappearance of which rocks his whole existence, set against his cruelty to his young wife. Friends, we see that there is a, let's say, combination of pathos and revulsion in the personality of the judge. When judge used to beat his wife, readers started feeling that judge is a very brutal person. But this is the same judge who adores his dog Mutt. How can such a brutal person can love, let's say, a pet, a dog. So judge has those kind of human feelings, human tendencies, that kind of sympathy into his behavior, but not for his wife or for any human being, but for his dog Mutt. There is frequent outrage at the deprivation and poverty in which many of the characters live, including the cook's son in America, and there is humiliation, for example, in the treatment of Sai by her lover turned rebel, or Lola, who tried to stand up to the Nepali bullies. Friends, there are various examples in this story where we find a kind of outrage, a kind of, let's say, effort to come out from the poverty and from the present social and economic condition. There are many characters which are following this kind of attitude. Take for example the case of Cook. Cook is dissatisfied from his own life, and which is why he wants to send his son to America. He wants his son to become a very rich person. But when the son goes there, he finds a lot of humiliation and racial discrimination. When the Sai is, let's say, treated very badly with her lover, Gyan, she felt that kind of humiliation which she has never faced before, because Sai was just 16 years old girl. She was not exposed much to the world. She was an innocent person. So the love which was there in the mind of Sai turned to rebel. So the lovers became enemies of each other in the end of the story. We had the case of Lola also, who tries to stand up to Nepali bullies. Lola wanted to, let's say, raise a voice against Nepalis, but she also doesn't have much experience and much contacts in the society. Against these strong emotions, however, Desai expertly injects doses of comedy and buffoon-like figures. Friends, we cannot say that this novel is full of, let's say, negativity and trauma. Kiran Desai has also tried to put somewhere a kind of comedy or a kind of, let's say, buffoon. Buffoon-like figure means a figure which make people, let's say, entertain people or make people happy, try to make people laugh. So these are the characters, buffoon characters, which are, let's say, in some situations which is visible in the story. One of these is Biju, winsome friend Saeed, an African. Biju hated all black people but liked Saeed with a slayer and much more happy-go-lucky attitude of life. So there are scenes when Biju is talking to Saeed and there is a conversation between both of them where Saeed is behaving like a comic person, and all these kind of, let's say, dialogues create a interest, create a, let's say, funny aspect in the story. Whereas Biju finds it difficult to have a conversation even with the Indian girls to whom he delivers a takeaway meal. Saeed had many girls. So we see that there is a contrastive difference between the personality of Biju and the personality of Saeed. Biju had no girlfriend, but Saeed had many. Biju was not much confident. He was a timid boy. So let us try to understand the difference between both of them with the help of this quotation from the text. And I quote, "Oh my God," he said, "oh my God, she keep calling me and calling me. She clutched at heads. I don't know what to do. It's those deadlocks, cut them off and the girls will go. But I don't want them to go." So friends, Saeed in this quotation is appreciating himself. He is saying that the way he looks is liked by the girls. Girls become mad about his personality. And thus, how can he be so charming, so beautiful, due to which the girls are disturbing him all the time? The girls wanted to call him and talk to him all the time. Much of the comedy also arises from the Indian miss or overuse of English language. Result equivocal. a young judge wrote home to India to competing his university examination in Britain. Friends, there are other examples also in the story where we find the misuse or overuse of English language. Take for example, when judge was studying in England and his result was out, he sent a letter to his father with the message that result equivocal. Now, there was a, let's say, confusion which arose after this message with the let's say with this phrase as result equivocal. What, asked everyone, does that mean? It sounded as if there was a problem because un word were negative words, those basically component in the English agreed. But this his father consulted the assistant magistrate and they exploded with joy. So friends, if after, let's say, this letter reached to the father of the judge, the father and all the relatives were confused that what does this result unequivocal means? Does it mean that the boy failed in Cambridge or the boy passed in Cambridge? So the father went to a house of assistant magistrate who told the judge that it means that the boy, your boy, has qualified the exam. And then there was an explode of joy everywhere and everyone felt happy and satisfied. Bose, the judge's friend from his university days, is a wonderful, optimistic, but pompous individual, made all of more ridiculous by his overuse of British idioms. So friends, we find this funny aspect again in the dialogues of Bose. Bose was judge's friend. They met each other when they were studying at Cambridge. So Bose used to speak in a very, let's say, optimistic but pompous manner, a very grand manner, like he is projecting something, like in artificiality, he is using his language. Let us look at this statement of Bose to understand the way he uses the British idioms and British language. Cheery oh, right oh, tickety bo, simply smashing, chin chin, no sir, how's that, bottoms up, I say. So, generally people do not talk in this way, but Bose is using such kind of phrases to project his, let's say, excellence in English language, to prove his superiority in English language as compared to the natives of that place, English native men. An original and modern aspect of Desai's style is the almost poet-like use she makes of different print forms on the page. She uses italics for foreign words as if to emphasize their extonicness and untranslatability, and capitals for emphasize when someone is angry, expressing surprise or disbelief, a natural development of the nitpicking that to write in capitals is like shouting. So friends, when we look at the language of Kiran Desai in the novel, we find that Kiran Desai has, let's say, used different styles to express different, let's say, expressions in the novel. Let's say if some character is angry, Desai write the dialogues in anger with all the capital letters. Or if there are some words which are used from, let's say, foreign language, take for example, if any Indian is in England and talking to the Englishman and use some Indian words, then all those words will be in the italic form. So in this way, there are experiments which Kiran Desai has done in this, let's say, in writing this novel. Published at extraordinary acclaim, The Inheritance of Loss heralds Kiran Desai as one of our most insightful novelists. So we see when we observe this novel, when we, after discussing the story, we can see that there is a kind of difference which this novel makes as compared to the other novels which are written in the age. And the way Kiran Desai has written it proved her as a different kind of, let's say, novelist, as compared to the other novelists of who are writing in Indian writing in English. She illuminates the pain of exile and the ambiguities of post-colonialism with a tapestry of colorful characters, an embitterment old judge. So friends, when Desai, let's say, creates the personality of judge, she is trying to talk about the pain of exile or the ambiguities of post-colonialism, and thus the judge is an epitome of that kind of, let's say, confusion which emerges into the mind of a person who belongs to a post-colonial country. Sai, his 16 years old orphaned granddaughter, a chatty cook, the cook's son, Biju, who is hopscotching from one place to another, is miserable in miserable living conditions. And friends, there are, let's say, variety of characters which are visible in the novel. There is Sai, who is a 16 years old girl. Then there is a cook who is, let's say, always trying to talk and chat. Then we have Biju, who is moving from one place to another place to get a better lifestyle, but he do not get that. So we have all kind of masala which is visible in this novel. The novel is set partly in India and partly in the USA. So the novel, friends, also has the kind of global approach, because there are settings of India also and there are settings of America also which are visible in the novel. Desai describes it as a book that, and I give the quotation which is spoken by Kiran Desai, tries to capture what it means to live between East and West and what it means to be an immigrant. So friends, Desai wrote this novel because she was close to the people who saw the difference between East and West, who saw that kind of clash in immigration, and goes on to say that it also explores at the deeper level what happens when the Western element is introduced into the country what is not of the West. So Desai not only talk about the clash between East and West, but she also talks about the, let's say, introducing Western elements in an Indian's personality, and what are the problems which Indians face who behave like Western people in India, which happened during the British colonial days in India and is happening again with India's new relationship with the states. So friends, this problem is not outdated. We cannot say that the Indians behaving like Britishers or Americans was the problem which let's say eloped long back, but this is the problem which still exists in the Indian society. When Indians go abroad, they get an exposure of, let's say, abroad countries, US, UK, etc. They start behaving like Europeans and Americans, which is not right, which is not appropriate. So that kind of relationship which Indians had with the US, because there are many Indians who frequently travel US, and thus that kind of, let's say, change appears into their behavior. Her third aim was to write about, now we are talking about the different aims with which this novel, The Inheritance of Loss, is written by Kiran Desai. She further talks about her third aim, and I again quote Kiran Desai in this line. What happens when you take people from the poor country and place them in a wealthy one? How does the imbalance between these two worlds change the person's thinking and feeling? How do these changes manifest themselves in a personal sphere, a political sphere over time? Friends, we see in this story that India is a poor country and America is a rich country. When an Indian, a poor Indian, is migrated to America, and he sees that all people around him, they are prosperous, they are rich, they are happy, they are enjoying their life, then what kind of feelings emerge into that person's mind? That kind of manifestation is visible in the behavior of judge as well as the cook's son Biju. She further says These are old themes that continue to be relevant in today's world, the past informing the present revealing the past. So, in this quotation, Kiran Desai is trying to say that in this novel, she has tried to mix the past with the present. The problems which were there in the past still exist. Take, for example, the case of the judge. Judge went to England many years back, but then also he faced racial discrimination. Now at present, Biju is in America, and there also he is facing that kind of racial discrimination. So, America and England, both the countries are different. The years are different, the decades have been changed, but even then, the problem of racial discrimination remains at that very point. The book paints the act of immigration and how the post-colonial war creates despair, resulting in the sense of isolation inherited by each character in the novel. Friends, we see that it is a kind of war which is there in the post-colonial countries. That war is between the immigration and staying back to India. That war is between behaving like an Indian or behaving like a European or American. So that kind of, let's say, clash, that kind of complexity which is created in the mind of Indians as a post-colony of Europe, it creates, let's say, makes the life of Indians miserable. In a generous vision, sometimes funny, sometimes sad, Desai presents the human quandaries facing panoply of characters. So this kind of vision which Desai is trying to present in, let's say, this novel has a mixture of funniness and sadness. This majestic novel of a busy, grasping time, every moment holding out the possibility of hope or betrayal, illumines the consequences of colonialism and global conflict of religion, race, and nationalism. Friends, when we read this novel, we find that the novel is majestic in its sense. Every time, every moment is holded or captured into the possibilities of what can be the consequences of colonialism or global conflict. What are the problems of religion? What are the problems of race? What are the problems of nationalism? All these things are discussed in detail with the help of various characters in the story. Almost all the characters have been stunned by their encounters with the West. So friends, in this story we see that not only the characters who went abroad, they faced the encounter with the West, but the characters who are still in India, they have also faced the encounter with the West. Take, for example, the relationship of Sai and Gyan. Gyan did not go abroad, but through Sai, he felt the, let's say, the inferiority in his personality and of his circumstances and condition. As a student isolated in racist England, the future judge feels barely human at all and leaps when touched on the arms as if from an umbrella intimacy. Yet, on his return to India, he finds himself despising his backward Indian wife. So friends, when Judge went to America, there was nobody to console him. There was nobody to share his feelings. So, Judge felt that he is not even human in England. Nobody tried to, let's say, touch the arms of Judge with intimacy. And the same Judge reflected in his, let's say, brutality towards his wife when he came back to India. Arguably, the most beautiful portions of the book are the nuggets. Desai paints of the cook's son Biju, who gets by on the barest of bare from one minimum wage job to other in New York City. So, friends, the most critical examples, the most pathetic examples from the story are taken from the life of Biju. When Biju is traveling from one restaurant to another restaurant, he is thrown out from the jobs, he is fired from the jobs, he is, let's say, not stable there, and he's feeling humiliated, he's feeling agitated, but there is no solution to his problem. Let us try to understand the condition of Biju with the help of this quotation. In the Gandhi's cafe, the lights were kept low, the better to hide the strains. It was long journey from here to the fusion trend, the goat cheese and the basil samosa, the mango margarita. This was the real thing, generic Indian, and it could be ordered complete, one stop on the subway line and even on the phone, gilt and red chairs, plastic roses on the table with synthetic dewdrops. Desai writes when she describes one of the Indian restaurants Biju works at. So friends, this example of the Gandhi's cafe is a complete narration of the, let's say, what all the employees of Gandhi's cafe are facing. Take for example, the employees working in Gandhi's cafe like Biju are dissatisfied from their condition. But their emotions are not expressed because the lights are always dim. Nobody can see their facial expressions. On the other hand, the Gandhi's cafe used to behave like the traditional Indian manner. So their menu card had the names which are related to the Indian names. Take for example, basil samosa or mango margarita. So mango, Indian, margarita, Western. When clubbed together, they create a new dish into their restaurant. So in this way, we can understand that there is generic representation of Indianism which is visible in the description of this novel by Kiran Desai. Gilt and red chairs, plastic roses on the table with synthetic dewdrops. Now, what all these things suggest? The artificial environment of this restaurant. The restaurant tries to prove that it has that kind of satisfaction, happiness, but in reality, everything is artificial in this restaurant. The employees working there are not satisfied from their life. What bind these seemingly disparate characters are shared historical legacy and a common experience of impotence and humiliation. For the characters in the inheritance of loss, escape is impossible and the misery is birthright. When we look at this, let's say, novel, we find that all the characters are surrounded by some kind of dissatisfaction, humiliation, and impotence. And they are not able to come out of those conditions because they are not capable of doing that. They don't know how to live their life judiciously, and which is why their condition is very miserable. Sai's parents, before they die, are filled with the same loneliness as their daughter. The son whose mother was bidding farewell earlier in this review botches his goodbye, and we learn that never again would he know love for the human being that wasn't adultery by another contradictory emotions. The son grows up to be the judge, arranged into the loveless marriage that descends into rape and other abuses. Friends, we see that judge's parents are very affectionate towards him, but that affection is not visible from the personality of judge. We cannot see that kind of, let's say, emotion, and thus the judge becomes an epitome of contradictory emotions. Similar personality is also visible in Sai. Sai's parents were very affectionate to her, but Sai became very rigid and adamant, and thus she used to behave even with her grandfather in a very formal manner and very courtly manner. The cook is an old man with no fulfillment in his own life, desperate that his son do better than he did. This pressure is eventually Biju's undoing. Friends, if we talk about the case of cook and Biju, we see that the Cook is pressurizing his son to, let's say, go abroad and earn money, which is why Biju is thrown out of different jobs. Biju is not a self-motivated person. He was forcefully sent to America from his father, and which is why he was not able to make himself successful and earn money in America. Sai's tutor before Gyan is Noni, a spinster who never had love at all, and so on for the entire cast. It is an old story. Certain moves made long ago, we are told, had produced all of them. When we look at the case of Noni, she was also shown as a lady with no emotions in her because she was never fall in love. Same is the case with all the characters. All the characters in the story, they are missing that kind of true love and affection from their life. If we talk about the case of Sai, Sai was an orphan girl. She has no parents. If we talk about Gyan, Gyan had no money. He was a very poor person. If we talk about Cook, Cook had no son. Son was abroad. If we talk about Son was living alone and facing racial discrimination. If we talk about the Judge was also alone in his life, seeking a kind of affection from his dog. They are, if you like, variations on an absence of dignity, children, criminals, and buffoons, and too often that's all they are, or at least the rest is hidden, the civilized sheen of Desai's prose obscuring the extent of violence done to their lives by circumstances. Friends, when we read about all these characters, we find that these characters are the mouthpieces of the circumstances. Naturally, these characters are not bad, but just because of the characteristics under which they fall, they were not able to, let's say, behave in a natural manner. We had a variety of characters in the story. We had children, we had criminals, we had buffoons, we had revolutionists, we have, let's say, poor people, we have rich people, etc. But all of them are behaving in an unnatural manner. All of them are behaving in a, let's say, negative manner. All the minds are very complex, they are not smooth. The book's language, scenarios, and juxtapositions are funny, threatening, vivid, and tender all at the same time. So friends, the language of the book, on the other hand, is also very funny and full of contrasting images. The comic elements always intervened with irony as characters struggle with the world bigger than themselves, the world that only ever seems to accept them partially and rarely on their own terms. So friends, in this story we see that there is a pinch of irony in every comic situation. The characters are struggling with the, let's say, outer world and in their inner world. They are not able to accept the, let's say, outer conditions in which they are living, and thus they are dissatisfied in their own terms, in their own conditions. The novel's elaborate structure takes the reader into the world of nationalism and migration, which seems complementary and timeless, familiar and unpredictable. In this story, friends, we see that there is a, let's say, complete detailed structure of the nationalism and migration. We see that the present time is timeless. Timeless means we are not able to understand that the story is enacted in 2000 or 2021. But we can see that the story belongs to all times. Such situation might have happened 100 years back. And now in the present century also, these characters are facing this kind of unfamiliarity and this kind of unpredictable attitude. Chapters alternate between India and US, juxtaposing the slow pace of life in the hills with the frantic movements of the illegal migrants' existence, maintaining the degree of suspense until discontinuous narrative collide. When we look at the story, we see that there is a, The story moves from India to US, then again comes back from US to India, and somewhere we find that the life is very fast. If we compare the life of, let's say, Kalimpong with the life of New York, where this person Biju was living, there is a contrastive difference between the life. New York can be called as a fastest city in the world, and then we come to Kalimpong, which is a remote hilly area, too slow in their lifestyle. So there is a, let's say, completely different scenes which are portrayed in the story. Kiran Desai writes an elegant and thoughtful study of families. The losses each member must confront alone, and the lies each tells himself or herself to make memories of the past more palatable. Friends, we see in this story that there is a kind of thoughtfulness, there is a kind of loss which every member of this novel is facing, or they are confronting. They are alone in their life, they are telling lies to themselves, and which is why they are, let's say, in the dilemma between their past and the present. The novel, though rich with details and presenting the picturesque mosaic of life, at times falls prey to monotony and boredom. When we look at the life of these characters, we find that their life is full of monotony, their life is full of boredom, their life is full of, let's say, picturesque images. They are apathetic towards all those things. The darkness and the inner conflict sometimes weighs too much upon the mind and soul, but that's what the good writer should be capable of. And Ms. Desai has been very successful in touching and stirring the depth of human emotions and thought. Friends, when we read this text, we see that the text is full of darkness. The text is full of inner conflict between the mind and the soul, what you want to do and what you are actually doing, and thus the readers can associate themselves with this text, because most of the readers are also facing similar kind of dilemma into their mind. There is similar kind of, let's say, absence of human emotions and thoughts which are there in the mind of every Indian. The novel is amazing in many ways. The picture of India drawn in intricate and fascinating, the characters are complex, and the writing is simply stunning. When we read this novel, friends, we find that the language is completely different and fascinating. It is very charming. There is a sense of complexity, and the writing, which is, let's say, expressing that complexity, is well used through Kiran Desai. However, the whole picture painted in this novel leaves no room for hope, no room for joy, no room for even tiny bit of beauty. So friends, this is something which is contrastive to the narration which is done in the beginning of the story. When Kiran Desai narrates the scene of Kalimpong, we find that this place must be very, let's say, beautiful, very charming, very peaceful. But the story ends with no peace, no hope, no joy, and there is little room for beauty, let's say little space for beauty in the mind of all these characters. And thus we can say that the narrative techniques which Kiran Desai has used in the novel, they are representing poles apart identities in the characters and in the setting also. The characters live in a very, let's say, peaceful place, but their minds are always unpeaceful. The characters are in the dilemma between the East and the West. They migrate from a very peaceful place to a very busy place where they are unable to settle down. And Kiran Desai was able to maintain a balance between these two different kind of settings and these two different kind of, let's say, situations with the help of her narrative techniques. That is all for today. I hope that you have understood that with what kind of intention Kiran Desai had written this novel, and why this novel has that kind of globalized approach which made her one of the most famous fiction writers for Indian writing in English. Thank you for listening. The lecture ends here.